This chart shows the best performing stock investors in Congress right now, which makes them some of the best investors in the world. Like that one time Congressman Josh Gottheimer sold Silicon Valley Bank the day before the FDIC had to take over the bank, while he sat on the House Financial Services Committee at the time. Or former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who's famously outperformed the stock market for years. But now we can see exactly what stocks these congressmen are buying. So let's walk through the top 5 stocks that Congress is investing in right now, starting with some interesting trades by smaller members and working our way up to a congressman who made a 125% return on tens of millions of dollars in stocks last year. So starting with our smallest trader of the bunch, Mitch McConnell, who's traded over $1 million worth of stocks and made nearly double the stock market at over a 42% return last year as reported by Unusual Whales. So McConnell first made waves in the investing world back in 2017 when his wife, Elaine Chao, who was about to be sworn in as the Transportation Secretary, promised to sell her shares in Vulcan Materials, a major US highway construction provider, but instead of selling, she ended up holding over $300,000 in the stock while strongly advocating for a $1 trillion infrastructure spending plan. Exactly the kind of spending that would boost a company that helps build highways. The stock saw a jump in price many times, pretty much every time the infrastructure plan was brought up, with Chao and McConnell ultimately netting a $40,000 profit from the stock. But that wasn't McConnell's only questionable brush with stocks. Later, in March 2020, McConnell's wife reportedly bought over $600,000 in funds tracking the S&P 500 and total US stock market. And just a few days later, Senator McConnell introduced the CARES Act, you know, the original $2.2 trillion money printer that some people say overfueled the stock market's rise. It's safe to say that congressional trade made the couple some money. But let's look at McConnell's most recent trades before we move up the list of bigger and bigger traders to a congressman who's more than doubled his stocks in the last year on tens of millions of dollars. So recently the McConnells have been absolutely loading up on Wells Fargo stock, building a position of over $4.7 million between 2018 and today. So let's look at why this might be and see if there's any hints of what McConnell might be seeing before the rest of us. So on paper, Wells Fargo has had a couple rough years. In 2020, they agreed to pay $3 billion in lawsuits for their practice of opening bank accounts without their customers' permission, resulting in the SEC charging their executives and their CEO getting fired and permanently banned from ever working at another bank. Not a great look for a potential investment. However, then there was the time Wells Fargo forced unwanted auto insurance on their customers, or in December 2024, when they had a data breach because their employee mishandled customer information. Basically, there's a lot betting against this stock, especially because the company has a serious risk of getting fined again. But despite this, the company's profits were up 47% year over year, and that, paired with strong guidance for 2025, has caused the company's stock price to rise over 60% in the past year. So as investors, we need to look deeper, especially given that Mitch McConnell was the Senate Majority Leader and later Minority Leader and has huge sways over what bills make it to the floor and what his fellow senators vote on, including in banking. So is there something the McConnells are seeing or doing that could cause the next big jump in this company's stock? So I think the real opportunity with Wells Fargo is betting that the FUD is overhyped. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and it's a shorthand for any bad news that could hurt the company. A lot of people nowadays use it to talk about fake news that's just trying to push a stock down, but it also applies when a company does something that actually increases their own risk, like Wells Fargo opening fake bank accounts. I cannot believe they did that. Basically, risk is another word for uncertainty. So if Wells Fargo's uncertainty or risk decreases, the company's stock price could rise. And that risk comes in 2 areas: customers leaving and government oversight. So customers leaving, hard to stop, but maybe Wells Fargo is actually improving the user experience. But I think government oversight is the more interesting area for investors right now. So in September 2016, after Wells Fargo was first fined for opening millions of fake accounts, McConnell moved to weaken the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that did the fining, resulting in some public pushback, but ultimately helping Wells Fargo. And a year later, in 2017, he led the Senate on repealing their ban on forced arbitration clauses in bank contracts, basically making it harder for a class action lawsuit against a bank specifically. dramatically, which again helps Wells Fargo given their legal troubles over their fake bank accounts. Now, I'm not saying that McConnell would make a law just to help his investment, but his wife Elaine Chao was also an executive at Wells Fargo, and crazy enough, they paid her a bonus specifically to get a government office. Apparently that's just a thing you do in Washington. So given Wells Fargo's CEO is focused on reducing risk from the 10+ government consent orders, basically orders telling them to clean up their act, any insight from someone high up in the government could give them an edge on this stock, since they could see through the fog of FUD and see what the fines and orders will probably end up looking like. So we'll see if the McConnell's recent trades pay off, but next we have a congresswoman who has an insane track record of picking under the radar health tech stocks that then go on to make her a ton of money. So Congresswoman Tina Smith made a 44% return last year, almost double the overall market, while trading $4.8 million in stocks. And Smith is no stranger to superhuman stock picks. In November 2023, her husband Archie purchased between $100,000 and $250,000 worth of a medical tech stock called Tactile Systems Technology. This turned out to be a case of perfectly timing the dip, as the stock reportedly jumped over 19% over the next 2 weeks, with the stock reaching a 40% rise by the end of the month. This all while Senator Smith sits on the committee in charge of regulating biomedical research and development. And strangely enough, the small company also secured millions in federal contracts, and it just happens to be based in Smith's home state of Minnesota. But that was only one of her husband's miraculously timed trades that he is still making today. Later that same month, he invested as much as $200,000 in Artivion, a heart-focused medical device company, again under Tina Smith's committee's jurisdiction. And Capital Trades reported that she made upwards of 30% in just 2 to 3 weeks after the company reported blowout earnings. And by the end of 2024, the stock had more than doubled in value. This trade raised even more eyebrows because it was a penny stock medical device company, normally an extremely unpredictable investment, but they perfectly timed the dip and made a fortune. Now, Senator Smith does say that she has absolutely no role in her husband's investment decisions, but she's lucky she just works in Congress, since most public companies restrict both their insiders and their spouses from trading the stock. But if her husband is the Oracle of Minnesota, let's see what he's buying now. So he recently bought a few more shares in Tactile Systems, but their biggest overall holding is a company called Insulet Corporation. Insulet is a mid-sized stock that has increased by 40% in the last year. The company makes these insulin pods, which you basically wear, and it delivers the exact amount of insulin that diabetics need when they need it, without needing a tube or pumps. It's a cool piece of med tech that's made the company and their investors a lot of money. But Insulet's dominance in the space may soon be challenged by rising competition from companies like Medtronic, who is working on launching their own pumpless insulin system. And this could be a big concern for existing investors, since the company's very high valuation doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room for competitors to take market share. But maybe there's something that Smith knows that the rest of us don't. See, back in 2018, when Smith was appointed to the Senate, her husband already held quite a few shares in Insulet. And at this time, Tina Smith decides to put her support behind repealing the medical device excise tax, a tax that costs medical device companies like Insulet a lot of money. In fact, here's a letter from a bunch of medical device companies back in 2013 requesting the repeal of the tax, signed by, you guessed it, Insulet Corporation. But similar to Wells Fargo, Insulet faces some risks that are hard to predict for normal investors. They have the new medical device competition, they just got FDA approval for type 2 diabetes, but also the new GLP-1 weight loss drugs will potentially reduce the number of type 2 diabetics. But if you, just as an example, sat on the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, which helps review medical device regulations and helps oversee the Food and Drug Administration, you could probably get a clearer picture of their future than the rest of us. So it's possible that Insulet's risks are overblown and the stock price will rise as the market starts to realize that. And you know, fun fact, Tina Smith has publicly supported reforms to ban both Congress and their spouses from trading stocks. So even though these Congress trades aren't breaking the law, it sounds like they're aware that the current setup isn't super popular. But I don't know, do you think that being allowed to trade stocks hurts trust in Congress? It just doesn't seem worth it to me. And now let's move to one of the most famous or infamous investors in Congress, Nancy Pelosi. So I've talked about the Pelosi stock trades in 2 separate videos now, but Nancy Pelosi and her husband are so active with their estimated $250 million in stocks that I had to share the updates since last time. I mean, Pelosi has traded $161 million worth of stocks, and her portfolio is up a staggering 70% in the past year. So Pelosi's husband, Paul, does all of their actual trading through a fund that he runs, and it's a very successful fund. Once in 2020, he bought $1 million worth of Tesla options, and the next month, President Biden signed an executive order to replace the entire federal automobile fleet with electric cars. And later, the couple bought options for Broadcom, worth $1.6 million off the back of the CHIPS Act, which Pelosi backed and pumped money into US semiconductor stocks. Or maybe most famously of all, the time way back in 2008, when Paul bought $1 to $5 million worth of Visa stock during their IPO. At the time, Visa was in a fight to block laws that could lower credit card fees. And we know now that Visa took a lot of time lobbying Pelosi, and when 60 Minutes broke the story of these trades in 2011, it partially led to the passing of the Stock Act, designed to restrict congressional trading. And it didn't really stop the trading, but it did show us what Congress is buying through disclosure reports, which is how we also know that Pelosi outperformed the market by 3x since 2014. So I'm excited to see what she's buying now. So Pelosi's most recent trades are interesting. Shortly after the new administration took over, Pelosi added to their shares in big tech, Google, Amazon, and Nvidia, but they also bought options in a less well-known company called Vistra Corp, an electricity generation company that lists itself as the largest competitive power generator in the country. So even though electricity generation sounds more like an old school Warren Buffett stock than a Wall Street Bets style play, VST has absolutely exploded in value over the past few years, even after the recent dip. And while it might sound like a boring utility company, this stock is actually a bet on recent tech trends including nuclear power, AI, and sustainable energy, which are all areas where Pelosi could have an edge. So Nancy Pelosi has been involved in energy policy for a very long time. In fact, in 2007, she created the House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. And later, in 2018, she called for the creation of a second committee on climate, giving her a better than average look at the future of the energy sector, both through technology and through policy. And I think those are the 2 lenses to look at this stock. How will technology affect the future stock price, and will government policies help or hurt the company? So let's start with technology. It seems like every new tech innovation requires more and more energy. Remember all those articles about blockchain sucking up power a few years ago? Well, AI is the new energy boogeyman, and tech companies are starting to realize that this is a problem they'll need to solve, or they're going to face public backlash. Governments are already pressing big tech for their data center emissions, and we've even seen protests from regular people fighting over the water used to cool data centers. And if there's ever an energy shortage, that pushback is only going to magnify. And so this situation has caused a big influx of tech investment into sustainable energy, since it reduces government scrutiny and makes regular people care less about how much energy they're using. And the US Department of Energy points out that to meet this growing demand, nuclear power is going to be one of the only options, putting Vistra as a solid way to invest in the future of energy technology, along with companies like Constellation Energy, which signed the biggest ever purchase agreement for clean energy with Microsoft. And it probably won't be the last, especially as we start to factor in the even bigger factor of government policy. Energy in the US is considered a matter of national security, and Nancy Pelosi was a key leader in an act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which committed $369 billion to the US renewable energy sector. She also supported the Build Back Better Act, which put billions of dollars into US infrastructure focused on the energy sector. Now, while the current administration has issued a memo pledging to pause federal assistance related to, in part, the quote, Green New Deal, it's not totally clear if they'll cut US energy infrastructure. Like, we don't know how this will affect Texas-based Vistra, since that same memo also promised to unleash American energy and manufacturing. But we do know that the market hates uncertainty, so it's no wonder that this stock has had a bumpy ride down recently. But by watching Pelosi's position, we might be able to see what's in store for the stock before the market does. But these next 2 congressmen and their stock picks have a much clearer path to profit, which might be why they've outperformed everyone that we've talked about so so far in the market. And if you notice that I'm skipping some of the congresspeople on this list, I'm only focused on politicians who traded over $1 million in total. Otherwise, we get people who made like 500% just buying Nvidia once, which isn't that useful, I don't think. But now let's move on to the real heavy hitters in Congress. And after that, I'll talk through how you could copy these trades and how well that strategy would work. This next congressman is a serious player in the market. Pete Sessions made a 95% return in the market just last year while trading over $11 million. That's even more than the 63% return he made last year. And this guy's history of impressive stock trading goes back for years. So this guy is interesting. In 2022, he publicly opposed a congressional stock trading ban, saying, "I don't think it's necessary," which makes sense since in 2021, Sessions was appointed to the powerful House Financial Services Committee, giving him oversight over the US finance industry. And then, you can't make this up, the very next day, he bought shares in 2 major banks. And prior to joining that committee, he hadn't been interested in finance stocks at all, mostly tech stocks. But the purchasing of bank stocks paid off for the congressman. Bank of Nova Scotia stock made a quick 15% gain over the next few months, and JP Morgan Chase has more than a 50% rise since he bought in. However, that wasn't the only time Sessions got in hot water for his trades. That same year, in late 2021, while Congress was debating federal subsidies for technology and chip makers, Sessions bought into Microsoft, TSMC, and Amazon. And it was later found that he violated the Stock Act when he failed to disclose those Amazon shares. He's also been caught not reporting up to $100,000 worth of trades on time, sometimes waiting as long as 6 months before reporting his trades. So with this guy, I'm less concerned with his most recent trades since they're sometimes so delayed. But if we look at Sessions' biggest stock outside of big tech, it's his over $500,000 investment in Costco. Costco is a grocery store that gives shoppers access to wholesale prices with a paid membership. And their stock price has had an amazing run in recent years, up over 200% in the past 5 years. And despite headwinds from inflation, supply chains, and the recent market dip, Costco's done a really good job at navigating the choppy economic waters. So the company is currently focused on expanding their global footprint, announcing plans to open 28 new locations around the globe. And they've been working on their logistics, acquiring Innovel Solutions in 2021 to help with their e-commerce growth. Now, Sessions hasn't been trading in and out of this position too much, so this seems like a long-term play for him. But his work in Congress has overlapped with his ownership in this stock. In 2021 and 2022, lawmakers discussed supply chain bottlenecks and their effects on inflation and pricing. Pete was part of those sessions. Later in 2024, the congressman bought shares in Costco just before the latest economic data was released that showed inflation was easing. That data ended up being a big boost to retailers like Costco. Now, Costco has been a steady grower for years, and I don't think it's too much of a short-term play, especially given how long-term focused their leadership team is. Heck, their CEO started as a forklift driver for the company, and he's worked for them for 40 years. But in the short term, Costco's stock price will depend a lot on what's happening in the broader economy. And based on his insane stock market returns, that might be how Sessions is playing this stock, since he could have some insight there. So if he reports another buy that isn't too delayed, it could be a sign that he thinks Costco is ready for another jump in price. So I'll be watching. However, our next congressman beats out everyone so far. But before we get to the top performing congressman's trades, some viewers pointed out on my last video that Congress is technically allowed to report these trades up to 45 days after they actually place the trade. Sometimes longer if the congressman forgets to report them. So I wanted to test, would you still beat the market by just copying each of these congressmen's trades even with the delay? So I'll be testing that after we review the last Congress trader stocks. So none of the congressmen so far can compare to Ron Wyden, the king of stocks, who has more than doubled his money this year with a 123% return in 2024. And that is on top of the already insane 78% return he made last year, trading just shy of $13 million of stocks while in Congress. So Wyden's wife does most of their trading, but the timing of those trades has caught people's attention. She started buying up shares in Nvidia back in 2020, while Wyden was supporting bills to boost US semiconductors, including co-sponsoring the America Leads Act and supporting the famous CHIPS Act that we talked about with Pelosi. And that timing might be one of the best performing trades they could have possibly made, given Nvidia made a 1,700% return since then. But it wasn't their only bet. In 2021, they bought bought shares in Applied Materials and KLA Corp, two companies that make semiconductor manufacturing tools. Shortly afterward, Wyden pushed a bill providing $52 billion in incentives to US-based chip production. Now, the Wydens ended up selling most of their shares pretty quickly after a public pushback, but it wouldn't be the last time they would get in hot water for their trades. So at one point, Wyden sat as the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, and it was found that they were making stock trades in companies run by the same executives who were testifying before the Finance Committee. But more recently, Wyden's trades have leaned more towards selling stocks than buying them, but there's one exception: his over $2 million position in Nvidia. So Nvidia's had an exceptionally strong performance in recent years, producing the best chips for blockchain, simulations, and AI models. This has led them to dominate an estimated 98% of the AI data center space, with each new generation of graphics cards used in AI processing selling out basically immediately. And this dominance has led their sales to 40x over the past few decades, driving the company's stock price to the moon. In fact, some analysts have said that Nvidia is so dominant in the space that the only way they could ever lose their position is if the government steps in, either by making their lives more difficult with trade restrictions or straight up breaking them up as a monopoly. Now, I think the former is probably more likely, but Congressman Wyden has had influence over technology and economic policy for a while now, including trade with China, which matters a lot given Nvidia's supply chain crosses all over the world. Wyden served as the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and a member of the Budget, Intelligence, and Energy and Natural Resources Committees. These roles take part in crafting tax and trade rules for high-tech manufacturing and R&D. Oh, and the fact that semiconductor chips are now considered a matter of national security, so that gives his committees oversight over that as well. And so given all that access that he has, this seems like the guy to watch to see what regulations might be coming down the pipe that could hurt or help Nvidia. But given that all of these trades are delayed by up to 45 days, how would you perform if you just copy these trades by Congress? And I should mention, there is actually a bill to ban stock trading by both Congress and their family members. Actually, there are quite a few bills that have been proposed, but these seem mostly symbolic since Congress hasn't shown any signs that they actually want to reduce their own ability to make money. But the easiest way to copy all of a congressperson's trades is to buy an ETF that just tracks them. There are actually two ETFs that track the trades of either Democrat or Republican congresspeople. Now, these are relatively new ETFs and they do have pretty high fees, but we can use them to see how well the copying strategy performs. So the Democrats one has slightly outperformed the market, while the Republican one has slightly underperformed. But when you average them together, they don't seem to have outperformed the S&P 500, and when you factor in the increased volatility of these ETFs, they look even less worth it. But they also don't have a long enough track record to draw a super solid conclusion, so I'll be sharing two reports below, one from a 2004 report that showed Congress does outperform the market average, but that does not account for a delay in reporting, and this study by Dartmouth College, which found Congress does not consistently beat the S&P 500, although some individual members may outperform the market, like we've seen. So for me personally, I'll be using Congress's trades as one data point in a stock, but just copying their trades without extra research probably won't make you the same money that it makes them. And I'll share this full list of Congress's outperformers on my Instagram, along with the daily stock breakdowns that I post over there. And for the month of March, I will be answering Instagram DMs from everyone who follows me and messages me. It's not AI or automated at all, but I've been having some great discussions over there on what stocks people are buying and what videos people want to see. And if you liked this video, check out my last video on Congress's stock trades. You should see what Congressman Josh Gottheimer has been up to.